Okay, class, for our first kind of exercise in rhetoric and explaining what rhetoric is, I want to kind of analyze for you rhetorically this letter from the first President Bush, little President Bush's big daddy, to the president at the time of Saddam Hussein, who was executed after our second war with Iraq. And let me just give you a little background so you kind of know what was going on. Basically, in 1991, when I was a kid, you got to realize that most of the world's economy runs on oil and gas, fossil fuels. I mean, if it didn't, we would never be involved in wars in the Middle East. Uh, it's almost like there could be a solution to this, like green energy, but that's crazy. It's much better just to let people go die in wars so all the presidents get rich from their oil investments. But anyways, I don't want to get into all that. But basically what happened was, as you know, the Bushes are an oil family, which is probably one of the reasons why we're an oil addicted nation. It's because many of our leaders are invested in oil. But Kuwait is a country that we get a lot of our oil from, and a lot of the world gets their oil from Kuwait. It's one of the wealthiest countries in the world in terms of the people in charge of the country having wealth because of this. And Saddam Hussein, the president of Iraq, invaded Kuwait. Now, when he did that, that made a lot of people angry because a lot of people do business with Kuwait. You know, so we warned him. We got together with the UN and put sanctions against them, and it didn't have any effect. So I just remember when I was a kid, we went to war with Iraq while I was asleep, and I woke up the next day and it was over. Like completely decimated their army in one day. So, like I said, this is 1991, but this is a good, I know it's a little before y'all's time, but this is a good letter to analyze, okay, because of all the rhetorical devices. So what you got to think about is, one, audience. The four main points of rhetoric. There's hundreds of minor techniques in rhetoric, but these are the four main points. Audience. Second one is purpose. The third one is topic, genre, style, medium. And the fourth one is author credibility. So I'm going to talk about some of the minor aspects of rhetoric, but I'm mainly going to focus on those. So who is the audience? Well, of course, the audience is, the primary audience is Saddam Hussein. That's who the letter is being sent to directly. But there's a secondary audience as well. The president also knows that this letter is going to be published, through the news media, that essentially the entire world is going to read this letter as well. Now, the unexpected audience, the tertiary audience, that the president probably didn't expect, again, was I don't think the president, maybe he did, I don't know, but I don't think that he thought the letter might be taught in rhetoric classes, 30 years later. So we're probably the tertiary audience, you and I. But okay, so let's look at this. So he's thinking about audience as he writes this. So what you've got to ask yourself is, okay, well, if the president's writing this letter directly to Saddam Hussein, he realizes, anybody who keeps up with politics and the rest of the world is going to read this, all the major news media, all the other presidents of all the countries and prime ministers, leaders, whatever. That's his audience. So, this is going to be very professional. Also, Saddam Hussein is a dictator, and dictators maintain their power through force. And so one thing that dictators can't do is they can't look weak. They can't lose face. Because, if they appear too weak, somebody's going to rise up and knock them out of power, and that means they will die. That's one of the reasons Vladimir Putin over there in Russia, rigs every single election and has his people he's voting against, arrested, and then commits widespread voter fraud and tries to keep voters from coming out and voting because his rise to power was so bloody. If he loses power, he's going to die. So you'll notice that the president is stern yet courteous to Saddam Hussein in this letter. So let's look at the beginning. We stand today, we plural, stand today at the brink of war between Iraq and the world. This is a war that began with your invasion of Kuwait. This is a war that can be ended only by Iraq's full and unconditional compliance with UN Security Council Resolution 678. Okay, so let's look at what he's doing here. One, he's emphasizing the idea that this will be a war between Iraq and the rest of the world, that no one is on their side. Okay, we're going to come back to that later because this acts as like an introductory paragraph. These ideas are going to be explored later. These are main points and like a big thesis. Okay. He places the blame fully upon Saddam Hussein for the invasion of Kuwait, and he gives him an ultimatum. This can only be ended if you comply to this resolution. Now, the fact that the UN Security Resolution, the collection of nations across the world that has over 200 nations, in it, this is evidence. This establishes his authority. Look, I'm backed by all this. It's not just me. Okay. Now he personalizes the letter here. I'm writing you now directly, and he's trying to give him an out while also, saving some face. But he's telling him, he's being very honest that this will end in certain calamity for the people of Iraq. It ain't gonna go well. And it didn't. I mean, like, we wiped out their whole entire military in hours, and the rest of them gave up hundreds of thousands at a time. But then he also says this, I'm writing as well because it is said by some that you do not understand just how isolated Iraq is and what Iraq faces as a result. Now, this is very carefully done because he's thinking about his audience. And he's saying, look, some people say that you don't understand how Iraq is. And then the next thing he says is, I'm in no position to judge whether or not this is correct. So he's, kind of saying, look, you don't understand. He's not saying you don't understand. He's like, some people say you don't understand. So that allows him to save a little face. It's not as confrontational. But then he goes on to increase his authority and mentioning that, your people, your foreign minister, has been told, where we stand and what we're prepared to do. So we do know that you know that. So it's interesting. There's some give and take here. Again, he improves his authority by discussing all the Security Council resolutions that are backing him, and yet he gives them an out. We prefer a peaceful outcome. Now, if you'll notice, the longer sentences tend to deliver information for you. So syntax, sentence length is an aspect of rhetoric. And if you'll notice throughout this thing, the short sentences are generally those of power. If you'll notice right here, we prefer a peaceful outcome. See, that sounds a lot more forceful than, this is not simply the policy of the United States. It is the position of the world community as expressed in no less 12 Security Council resolution. That doesn't sound as powerful as, the choice is yours to make. You will lose more than Kuwait. Nor will there be any negotiation. There can be no reward for aggression. These things, again, these short, forceful statements make force. And these are the points where he's not willing to bend on at all. There's repetition of UN Security Council Resolution 678, which we're going to hear over and over and over again. And that's him, reminding Saddam Hussein that, look, this is the whole UN behind me. And it's also evidence, it's evidence of his authority. Okay. All right. Again, look at the diction that he chooses. Full compliance, opportunity to rejoin the international community. So every time he gives him a little bit of salt, he gives him a little sugar too. A little harshness and a little sweetness. Look, man, you're about to mess up, but, type of situation here. Okay. Because again, he's thinking about Saddam as a dictator, and dictators can't lose face. But if you look at the way the next paragraph establishes authority, again, he's using repetition as a minor rhetorical strategy, repeating these ideas, and diction, withdraw from Kuwait completely and without condition, and then the tone, the emotional tone of this next paragraph. What is at issue here is not the future of Kuwait. It will be free. Its government will be restored, but rather the future of Iraq. The confidence there, like, look, man, Kuwait's going to be all right. We got Kuwait's back. What you need to worry about is you, and the forcefulness of that statement. That's all rhetoric. The use of words to create those tones. Um, and again, that's the tone that comes in this next paragraph where it talks about how many countries are backing them up, and that Iraq's going to be against the whole world. You know, these facts, this is evidence he's using to back up his point, which all is about author credibility. He even points out that most of the Arab and Muslim countries are against them as well, which is, that's not something normally you would expect to happen. Um, this is interesting here because you'll use this technique in an argument essay later. A lot of times, in an argument essay, unless you want to look foolish, you have to point out what your opposition's argument is, and then you either have to contest it, disprove it, or you have to make concessions for it. You have to say, yeah, I know you're right, but, and you kind of change your position based on that. And what he's doing is he's doing the contestation aspect of it. He's like, look, you may be comfortable that, there's some Americans who may protest this war, but look, don't be tempted and don't confuse the diversity of American thought and how some people are encouraged to protest in this country, or at least used to be encouraged to protest in this country. Don't confuse that with us being divided, and don't confuse that with our will to see this thing through. So that's him thinking about the opposition's argument, blowing it out of the water, rhetorical strategy of contestation, okay, or disproving your opponent's argument. He gives more evidence here. Look, you're already feeling the effects of the economic sanctions. You keep this up, it's going to get even worse. Then again, it gets very forceful. The United States will not tolerate the use of chemical or biological weapons that we sold you a few years ago, or the destruction of Kuwait's oil fields and installation, which Saddam Hussein did anyway. This is basically an open threat here. It's like, man, if you resort to terrorism or biological warfare, burning the oil fields, the American people they're gonna demand the strongest possible response if you do a terrorist action against us, and you and your whole country will pay a terrible price. So you see how the diction changes here. Terrible price. Unconscionable. He switches the second person. We start off this letter with first person we. There's even some I in there. But when he gets extremely, when he gets, where he's putting his foot down on a point, we go to second person to directly to Saddam Hussein. But then he softens it again, a little salt and then a little sugar. He's like, look, I'm not writing this letter to threaten you. Look, this is to inform you. Like, I'm not happy about this. We don't have any, our people don't have any quarrel with your people, but you better take this time between now and January 15th to think about this so we don't end up in violence. And then he ends his letter with this: whether this pause is used as intended or merely becomes a prelude to further violence is in your hands and yours alone. So he's putting it all on Saddam. That's a neat aspect of rhetoric. He's completely putting it all on him. It's like, I hope you weigh your choice carefully and choose wildly, for much will depend on it. And again, it's threatening, but it's respectful. Okay, so this is rhetoric. Okay, so audience, we discussed that. We discussed some of the techniques that he writes. Okay, purpose. What's his purpose? To avoid war. That's pretty clear. To avoid war, to get Saddam to leave Kuwait. Okay, so in creating that purpose, George Bush has to think, well, what's the best way to get this across? Should I do a speech? Should I do a movie? Should I do like a rap video? Obviously not, right? Although that would have been pretty awesome. Watch this old hyena-faced guy rap, But anyways, what he ends up coming up with is, first, I'll give you a personal letter just between me and you, man to man. And so that's topic, genre, style, medium. The best way for him to get his purpose across, he feels, the best genre is the form of a letter. All right? And then, of course, author credibility, we discussed as we've gone along. So this is an example of how to break something down, and the main aspects of rhetoric and some of the minor ones too. Some other minor aspects of rhetoric that we didn't quite get to in this that you might remember from poetry is the use of punctuation. I am writing to you now, comma, creates a pause, directly, comma, creates a pause, because that adds that kind of, slows it down and makes it serious. When you slow down your writing, it makes things either sad or serious. When you speed it up, and makes it passionate and angry or whatever. So those are some of the minor aspects. So, all right, class, I'm out.